6 years ago, that was 2019, Andy No was assaulted by Antifa. Let's check in with Andy, find out about this group, find out what happened that day. What are they up to nowadays? Joining me now, Andy No, author of the book Unmasked. If you would like to know more about Antifa, it's probably the best read I've picked up yet on this group of malcontents. Okay, Andy, for those of us who don't remember, and we have a lot of obviously new viewers by now, what happened that day?
This was June 2019, and as I describe what happened then, it's really no different than what's unfortunately happened to other journalists recently in the last week and a half in Seattle. But I was in Portland, Oregon, that's where I'm from. Since going back to 2016, there has been a surge of left-wing violence in Portland that was legitimized by the Democrat leadership locally, statewide, and also nationwide in reaction to Donald Trump's first administration. And my reporting was, my commentary on what I was recording was critical of the violence because it was criminal behavior, property destruction, assault, and other criminal organized activities. And I also recorded videos and just let the videos speak for themselves. And for that, I eventually became a target. I think a really big changing point was back in 2018 when I reported on a really violent Antifa occupation of the local ICE facility. And this is going to come up again in terms of what's happening now because of all the hysteria and lies at that time against ICE by Democrats and the liberal media. There was this takeover of the ICE facility in South Portland where the building was surrounded, the exits were blocked off. It was essentially a hostage situation. And at that time, we had a mayor named Ted Wheeler who told, as a police commissioner, he had a dual role. He told the Portland police to not respond to it. He said, this is federal property, they're a problem. So there was this hostage situation for hours. And it took many, many days for federal agents and officers to mobilize there. And during that time, that whole building had been severely vandalized, shut down, and encampment was built. And I reported on it, and it was published in the Wall Street Journal at that time. This is summer 2018. And then everything kind of changed from there. I started getting more threats. By the following summer, 2019, was when I was beaten to a pulp and suffered a brain hemorrhage. And then the riots of 2020 happened. I did my reporting on the ground there for months. Portland had the longest weeks of violent rioting. And it went all the way to 2021. And when I returned to the streets in May of 2021 in Portland, I was jumped and beaten again when I was undercover. So there's a long history of violence by Antifa against me, unfortunately. And we're years out from that. And with what I've witnessed in these videos that have been recorded, and particularly the Pacific Northwest, but other places, those same networks and malcontents and violent agitators and also newcomers have been involved in the insurrection in Los Angeles and other cities that have become very violent. The riots in LA has kind of died down a bit, but it's been escalating more in Portland and Seattle.
Why the Pacific Northwest, Andy? Because this breaks my heart. I love Portland. I mean, it's been years since I've been, but gosh, it was such a beautiful friggin' place. Seattle was at one point one of the coolest American cities, and yet these places have become the hotbed where this stuff happens all the time. I mean, we're giving up control of large portions of Seattle with all the Chaz nonsense. What's in the water in the Pacific Northwest?
So these are states and local jurisdictions at the county level that are entirely run by Democrats. But that's not the only variable because there are other places like that in the US, like in Massachusetts, where I don't think the local elected officials would tolerate extended durations of political violence on the streets. But in Portland and Seattle, the Democrats there are more, they would call themselves progressive, more radical. And even the ones who are more sensible still are dealing with constituents and voters who have been systematically over many, many years brainwashed to become radical to the point where they don't realize that they're extremists. I mean, people think that it's peaceful protesting to start fires and to assault people and to attack. And they call it self-defense, community self-defense, and all this ideology. It's been institutionalized in education in our local media for so long. And also, I think maybe because the cities are blue collar, at least in Portland, Seattle a bit less so, but in Portland, it's a blue collar progressive city with a lot of white guilt because it's a majority white city. So it's like the white leftists there feel like it's not enough to be just liberal or a Democrat and support all these woke stuff. You have to go further than that. And so they turn a blind eye or they excuse when people are engaging in acts of violence for a cause that they're sympathetic to. And we saw that in 2020 and just recently, like in Seattle, when there's been violence against Christians who were worshiping in Cal Anderson Park, which is this public city park that is in the middle where Chaz used to be. The mayor released a statement, the mayor of Seattle said that this was a provocation. He condemned the Christians. He didn't really have much to say about the far leftist extremists who carried out religiously or attacks on people based on their religion. And so we have like weak leadership and cowardice, ideology, politics, all of that brewed together. And also, the mayors are the ones who appoint the police chiefs. So even if a police chief is not necessarily woke or leftist, they're sort of pressured to move in that direction. I think that's the case right now in Seattle and Portland. Personally, that's my view. Seattle has a new police chief. He just came from Madison, Wisconsin. He's a black man who's said some stuff in the last week that I find actually quite disturbing. He said at a press conference that he wouldn't be surprised or he was expecting to be convicted and imprisoned for obstruction against the federal government. And that's quite an astounding thing for a police chief of a major city to say. In Portland, we've gone through police chief after police chief in the last 5 years, and the mayor has constantly appointed either a woman or a black person because they can't have a white man do it. But the last police chief, the one who was the police chief during the 2020 riots, he stepped down to a lesser role. And we have a police chief in Portland who's a straight white man who has a lot to say about DEI. I think it's this white guilt. Like you have to feel like you need to say all those type of things in order to please these sort of radicals that are within the city.
Andy, Antifa seems to show up no matter what the riot seems to be about. It could be St. George Floyd, it could be ICE, it could be freaking LGBTQ, it could be anything, and Antifa seems to show up. What do they want?
So the ideology is anarchist communism, and they're revolutionary. They are really wanting to see the destruction of America, the literal destruction, like regime change, which is why they support every enemy of the US, whether it be Hamas or Hezbollah, jihadist groups, or terrorist communist groups that have existed in prior decades. They support all of that. And they claim to be opposing things like fascism or racism. And that may be part of their ideology, but there are also a lot of other things in their ideology that make them very violent, very dangerous, and extreme. And they attract malcontents. You've written about malcontents in your own book and in your own writings. And these are people who have, I think, disproportionate amounts of mental health issues. In fact, some of the people who have been at least one of the riot suspects who have been federally who was arrested in Portland over the an ongoing attack on the ICE building. This was a teenager runaway just last year. I was just looking into what Portland police have said about him, and a year ago, his family had reported him missing. So these are kind of some of the people that are being recruited into Antifa, and they're sort of like riffraff that they can use to give them weapons and have them engage in violent brawls with police and throw bombs, things like that. Sort of like it doesn't really affect the movement if these people are ultimately in prison, and very few of them are. There are also those who are in white collar positions who I would say are smarter in how they are part of the conspiracy. So they'll do things more like in the areas of recruitment and distributing these really radical booklets and texts, very akin to terrorist literature. It is terrorist literature. If you read it, they'll tell you how to make bombs, why to do it, who to target, how to besiege buildings, how to evade law enforcement detection through wearing these masks and black uniforms and destroying evidence. So, there's so much evidence of the criminal conspiracy aspect behind Antifa, and the fact that they are so good and adept at exploiting the First Amendment protections that exist in the US. They take that to full, not just to advantage, they exploit it. So they always fall back on the fact that they are not a formal organization, therefore, evading some more serious charges. But that's kind of all part of how they train their recruits about, we're not a group, we are just a movement, which is a lie. And I think if the federal government wants or to do some type of impact on this violent element that exists in the American far left, they really need to pursue federal RICO and conspiracy charges against some of these individuals, because that evidence is there. We cannot rely on local prosecutors to do it, mostly because there's a lack of will. You're not going to see those type of prosecutions out of Multnomah County, where Portland is, or King County, where Seattle is. But it has been done in San Diego County, of all places. Actually, it was last year that SoCal Antifa, which is a cell of militant Antifa members, was completely broken up. There was a trial. All 12 were convicted either through plea deals or at trial. And the evidence showed the conspiracy between one another with so-called journalists. And the discussions, they were all able to retrieve that on devices that were, some of them destroyed some of their devices, but some were able to, some of these devices were able to be retrieved. So your viewers and listeners can look in my reporting into SoCal Antifa in San Diego for like an example, a blueprint of what prosecutors can do. And also in Georgia State, the Attorney General there, Mr. Carr, is prosecuting in an ongoing Antifa domestic terrorism and RICO conspiracy case 61 suspects and money laundering as well. These type of cases, whenever I tell people, they're really shocked. Even the ones who follow my Antifa reporting, they don't hear about this at all in the national press. And I think that's intentional by those in liberal media. They don't want people to be informed that actually there are examples of where people in Antifa are involved in organized conspiracy.
Yeah. Andy, you stay safe, my man. Great work, as always. I would thank you for coming to my YouTube channel, but I know how brilliant it is, and I know you love it here. So subscribe and watch. We're going to start really ramping things up and putting some funny stuff, some interesting stuff out there, some collaborations. Either way, my YouTube channel is officially the place to be. So stick around.